Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Decloak podcast. And today we have a very special guest, Troy Cunningham, who's the former head of cybersecurity compliance at Criteo and former head of security at IPONWEB. And not just that, Troy is one of the best people I know within the industry, someone that I look up to, and someone that I inadvertently met at a conference. And we just absolutely hit it off on the back of good music taste, good
Yeah,
commonality, and also the fact we share an amazing surname. So there we go. How are you, Troy? You okay?
I'm doing pretty good today, man. It's a good day, sun shining, can't complain. Jeff, man,
Excellent.
how are you?
Excellent. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. I'm good. Obviously, don't have the good weather here in Scotland, but so be it. So, yes, Troy, thank you again for your time. And we'll jump straight in. So, yes, Troy, please give me a brief overview of you and your career.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on board. It's nice to connect. It's been a while, so it's really looking forward to this. Uh, yeah, so I've been in the security space for 10, 12 years, just over a decade. Been working before that in the IT space. I came to it a bit weird. I think we chatted about this in the past a little bit. I came to it weirdly because my background is originally in like welding and like building other stuff. Bit of a a DIY, do everything kind of person, jack of all trades.
Yeah.
But I tried some computing stuff early on. I really wanted to get into it. But it didn't work at the time. I think I was too bored with my courses or whatever. And so I thought, maybe I wasn't great at it. Turns out I'm really good at all those stuff. I'm good at Linux, I'm good at security, I'm good at networking and architecture and all that stuff. So yeah, and now I've just been doing it for a while. So yeah, like IT general, probably like 20 years, and then just security, 10, 12. And a lot of that spent here working in the UK, kind of like that. Of
Yeah.
course, with little bits of international pieces of work through through different jobs or whatever.
I
Yeah.
think it's an amazing journey. Obviously, for anyone who doesn't know, this is our second attempt at recording this, and we actually got on a really good track about welding. And obviously you'd mentioned that you didn't go to university. You
Yeah,
kind of
no,
obviously have
no.
a huge
Flunked out
interest
of
in.
all that. Flunked out of all that stuff. Like it just like classic education didn't work for me. I enjoyed it. I really loved learning, but for some reason none of that worked. So it was I remember
Yeah.
years ago I was working one business and they did this survey of like, hey, who's what is everybody's degrees from? And I just had to put welding, and it was like, you're like running half of this shit. Like you're like the person who's been the longest security leader in this space in our company. Why do you only have a degree in welding? I'm like,
Yeah.
that's is what it is.
Exactly. And I think degrees are so overrated. And I always tie back to I remember many years ago looking at things like the big four. Everyone wanted to join the big four.
Yeah,
And I don't really think it mattered what type of education you had. They used to be so stringent on things and like accountancy. And I'm like, if you're going for a cyber role and you have an accountancy degree or an accountancy background or a chartered,
yeah.
whatever it is, I'm like, what relevance is that? Is it maybe the discipline of going through such a stringent thing like accountancy?
I wonder. Sorry, let me just fix the zoom here.
That's okay.
Sometimes I think I remember years ago. So when I moved to the UK, when I moved to London, I placed a job application with the business, and they just refused me just based on my CV and stuff like that. And then about a month later, because I still fresh off the boat, still trying to get this, I ended up reapplying to the same job, but through a different board.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we haven't filled this, so whatever, give it a shot. Why don't you come in and do one of our tests, right? And just like some of my educational history, the test proved that I was better than all of their other candidates.
Yeah.
Suddenly they became very interested. And just because they're like, well, you don't have any education, you don't have any of that stuff. And I think it is that. I think the assumption is like, oh, if you've done this and this kind of classic academic thing, you must have the rigor of having to work hard or something like that. Which I just don't think that that's necessarily true, or it's not necessarily false, but it also doesn't mean that somebody else doesn't have the rigor, right?
Yeah.
Or doesn't have the knowledge, and that's really what I think. That's just a change in jobs everywhere, though. People are kind of starting to realize, like, actually, experience is what really matters, right? But
Yeah,
now you got to force to both worlds. You must have a university degree and 5 years experience. Like that's
I know, even like I discussed quite recently with a guest on the podcast, where they saw job advertisements, for like a first ever attempt at a cyber job, expecting 2, 3 years experience. It's like if they were clarifying, like if you had a hack the box account, or you had a repo, or you had like really cool slides online or articles, or maybe you were speaking at events, that kind of helps towards experience. But I think, people really need to change the paradigm on it in terms of, you need to have 10 years Kubernetes experience, or, a degree in cyber forensics. It's just like,
I don't even ask those, like I sometimes when I look at a CV, I will look for some bit of experience. But the CV is just to tell me, hey, what things that they believe that they can do, have they touched upon, whether they learned. It's just this kind of like, oh, is this the right kind of thing? Are they advertising themselves in the right kind of position? But usually my interview process is like, so what have you done? Why are you interested in this? And then I go through my different technical interviews where like questions about either specific security domain stuff that, honestly, like questions about what's the difference between encryption, encoding, and hashing. The amount of people who get tripped up by this in the security space is hilarious. But
I know. But even people with 20 years experience.
Yeah, exactly. And so I don't even, it's all about like, what are your capabilities? Like, what do you know? I don't really care necessarily what you've done before, although it's kind of helpful to let me know like where you're at. But really, it's those questions that tell me, hey, is your mind working enough for this? Do you know enough, that little bit of theory, enough theory to kind of do this? And do you have the mindset to actually work through a security problem space kind of thing? Then it's like, cool, that's what matters.
Totally. And I think people, I don't know, just get sidetracked with maybe something they've seen in terms of a trend or a theme, and they're like, oh, we need to hire someone in cyber who has this. And it's like, cool, you're going to need to spend 5 times the salary then. Like Splunk was a big thing for like so many years, and people are like, oh, we need a Splunk engineer. It's like, man, you're going to need like 5 to implement it and write rules and then automate the life out of it. And it's crazy.
Or do you need somebody who understands like logging, seams as a general concept, parsing, grok, this people who understand querying data.
I know. And it's like they just think they can get a junior analyst for like 30K, and it's just like, nah, it's not going to happen. But
absolutely.
Circling back, obviously, like I remember the first time you and I met. I think we just hit it off. Obviously lots of common things, like really good music, and we still have that playlist we need to update. And
I still listen to that playlist.
Yes, nice. Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll put it in the description as well, so people can get involved in the CunninghamPrime playlist, as I like to call it. But circling back to your career, Troy, obviously you've told me lots of great stories. Obviously through the time I've known you, but talk me through some of the challenges that you've been faced with in your career. Again, you can make that completely career orientated, or you can delve into the kind of personal aspect.
I mean, there's definitely two sides. I think my personal aspect of challenges in career has only been lately, because like now I'm the father of like 2 young children, and having young children in this career it's not opposed, but it's difficult. I think it also depends on mindset. Like I just like get into stuff, and I have that classic like developer problem. Like, it takes me like 15-20 minutes to ramp up into space to really start working on it and chewing on it. And sometimes working from home, sometimes if there's kids around or whatever, that's a problem. Also working, like I'm used to working before, like, oh, 5 p.m. is not when I stop. I stop when I feel like I've worked on this problem enough, right? But it's like, no, 5 p.m. is when you stop. You got to get your kids. So that's kind of like a personal barrier, I think, but or like a thing to work around, maybe not a barrier. At the end of the day, family is number one, right? So you make that choice, especially now when they're young. I think what I think professionally, there's some classic stuff. The classic stuff that I think almost everybody will say is resources. There's a bit of a thing about resources and perhaps a little bit of autonomy. I think it's funny because because of the way most businesses value security, or rather don't, they can be kind of stingy about the resources, and yet kind of want to expect they want the problem solved, right? Security is still unfortunately a bit of an insurance policy for a lot of businesses, but it's also an industry where everything is the most expensive that it could be.
I think that's a good point, and it would probably be less expensive if people just get their act together, and just had a moderate budget and reduced the amount of issues, because it's like the age old, it's like inflation, right?
Yeah.
It's like, if less breaches were happening, these things would become more affordable, because of course vendors sell things at a premium, some markup, because they know the market's desperate and that people need these technologies, because
absolutely.
They don't have the capability internally, or
and
they
it's
just
hard. It's hard. Like, let's not be. This is one of the things that is not that I tell other businesses, as in other or non-security professionals. This is something I tell security professionals. This stuff is actually hard. It's not simple. It's not easy. It's always a complex thing. You're always trying to balance the security need without, well, hopefully for most of us, trying not to be friggin' 1984 either, right? Like it's not easy. And the technologies that you have to build up and architect to work together, it is complicated, right? Which is why we pay those dollar bills. Like, it's not actually that simple to build.
I know. And you also need to factor, no one's going to be working 24/7. No one has eyes and ears on every aspect of your technology, what people do, and all the different services that get connected that your sysadmins or whoever may not know about. The whole resource issue and challenge, ironically, hasn't even come up yet in this podcast. So thanks. So, we
really,
as security leaders or hiring managers, whatever, this is always going to be the thing, that how do you convince the business? So let's just say then, I propose this question to you then, Troy. How do you convince an organization over resources?
I'm so glad you asked me this question. I said, this is not scripted, by the way. I'm so glad you asked me this, because it leads to there's my modus operandi. The thing, even though I see myself as a technical security architect, that space in security, and of course I've been a security leader in a few different businesses. The thing that makes it make sense is risk, like good GRC, and specifically good risk. Hilariously enough, though, and as I built on this over the past, I don't know, 5-6 years of this is the way to do it. Businesses just don't get risk. They're just super poor at it. And it was one of those things that, I really do say this, I naively thought businesses would be way more keen on doing a bit risk management, especially larger businesses. I'm not talking about startups. No startup wants to really and again, while risk management can be a bit complicated, it's not rocket science. I think, but
I think it's that there's a fear of understanding what a risk is. And I think, I've been doing this 20 years or something, and I think I've met maybe 5 people that just have the magic wand when it comes to the articulation of risk, right? Some people I've worked with recently are really good at the ISO component and transferring that into business relatable action. Then you'll get someone like Greg Vandergast, who's been a guest on this pod, and that episode will come quite soon. His ability and articulation is really good. But also, he's been quite open where if an organization doesn't get it, they'll get rid of you, and it's that kind of catch-22 is, how do you make those things relatable and also keep you in a job?
I think that's that is the key thing, is to make it relatable. So I think one of the big problems that most businesses have with risk, and this will come on to the resource thing really quickly, is that they just do it poorly, right? They just kind of see it here's this 5x5 or whatever, or 4x4, I don't know what you call it, and they're like, I think that's the problem. That's how big that problem is. And the relationship between the description of the problem, the way you model the problem, because essentially risk is just about modeling problems, and the relation between the model and the actual gravity of the situation are all different. Like none of them are connected almost like so much of the time.
Yeah.
And when it works is when it is. So like one of my I've been honing this on and off again for the past like 5 or 6 years. But one of the businesses that I got to a really good place with it, I was really happy with, because one, the cyber risk component wasn't just cyber risk, it was risk for the business. And you had the combination of strategic, operational. I won't go into the weeds of the model and stuff like that. I will actually be posting about that at some point, hopefully soon enough. I'll write how that particular model works.
Amazing.
But the strength of it was that because the business didn't really use risk before, or it had it, but it wasn't really using it, I'd say, okay, cool. I will also measure what I'm doing in a language that speaks for all of us. This risk model says, what happens when you lose a client? What happens? What's the impact of this event on our reputation, or maybe on our servers, or maybe on our employees? And we equalize all this thing, setting, equal impacts, but also financial barriers, right? Which means that when there's a security problem, I try to immediately relate it to a financial problem. And this does two things for me. One is that when I was talking about issues, I can actually kind of calculate for them, like, okay, this is how big this risk is to us. And actually, you shouldn't give a shit. like this is a $50,000 risk, and this is nowhere near our like $1 million that we care about. It allows that kind of thing, and this is why businesses are so bad with the resource problem, because they might see the headlines of like, oh, this £7 billion risk, or $300 million here, or whatever euros there. And they're like, yeah, that's bad. We should try and deal with that. But they don't have an appreciation for what their systems have, and how much it takes to fix that, and how much risk they're already exposed to. Because the measurement, the model, that kind of that's a word, that function of doing that isn't really well developed. And so when you come to this resource question, you're just kind of like, yeah, well, you go back to finger in the air. So like that business where it worked well, sure, I didn't get the resources that I wanted, but that was always within the context of like, okay, but this is how much risk we're carrying for this business, and this is totally acceptable because we understand where we're at. And that's just like, that's cool. That's not cool, but whatever. It's like you just do the best with what you have, and that is a known thing.
I think you're absolutely spot on. I also think that there's also a degree of trust I think needs to be built. And a lot of people, nobody gets it right. Nobody does. It's
there's no perfection. It's just
how you quantify things. Again, there's always that massive distance between the actuality or the probability of it, and also all the back end stuff. So you have a X $1 million risk. How much is it going to cost to close? It will cost X, but the actual people time, system implementation, refining. I remember having an issue with a SIM many years ago, and that we had a leader in the organization who just didn't get it. Like, we're getting tens of millions of attack alerts. It's because we're under attack. It's like, these events go through the firewall, triggers a signal, it then goes to the system, and it tells us how bad it is.
Saw it.
I'm like, Jesus Christ, but it's still a point of contention now, after I've left the organization. And it's like, that's a good thing. You're mitigating the risk. You understand the high volume. You've implemented maybe 1 or 2 iterations of a SIM.
That stuff is so key.
Yeah.
I remember years ago when I was still working in Canada, and my beginning of my security thing, when I was doing network security architecture and engineering, I built a SIM, an elk stack, very early elk stack.
Nice.
And I remember the owner operator of the business coming. It was a small business, like 250, 300 people, but we did like business with all the banks and national government. Anyways, came into my office one day, and he saw I had the elk thing with a world map on a
dashboards, yeah.
And he just saw these like pings happening across and like the events, and he's like, what's that? I'm like, oh, that's people attacking us. And he's just like, wow, I'm really glad you're here. It's one of those always like, I know we've invested a lot in this, but now that I just saw that stuff, I also there's no regret about that. And
it's the visualization, and that's where
yeah,
people psychologically, again, reaffirming back to my point about, trust. They feel safe when they see it. And yeah, I love it.
yeah.
And in terms of, I know we had some topics we wanted to discuss that you feel need relevance and clearing up in the industry. So yeah, run me through your topics.
I mean, the risk thing was one of those. I think like
Yeah,
that. I think that is the thing, and that's what like I'm trying to like preach and pioneer that a little bit. Is that obviously I have a particular way that I'm biased to, but really like I feel that the more businesses can get to just a little bit better, you really only have to get a little bit better with your risk modeling and make sure that there's a language throughout your business.
yeah,
The more you can make smarter security decisions. The reality is, as we said, security stuff is really expensive. You shouldn't try to fix every problem. That is impossible, right? Like
yeah,
we all take risks. Like I'm also a motorcyclist. I ride less now, but that's a calculated risk. I always wear armor. The risk is part of our lives. We should be willing to take risk, but we should also just kind of understand it. Like I don't go out, not understanding, what is the weather like that day, how much armor, what's the heat going to do to me, there's all this stuff that you should understand and be informed on. Similarly, businesses, I think, need to kind of take that approach to risk, especially if they want to have like a good cyber function, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I just think that's super key and tying it in. I mean, it also fits into like my whole security assurance or like systematic approach. Like that's at the kind of the fundamental base of it, is like, well, actually, but now I can look at all my applications and say, well, what's the riskiest one? Because I have a way to measure that,
In terms of like the risk management side, what do you think needs to change from a cultural point of view to get adoption? I remember working at a company and trying to explain what risk appetite was, and all of the senior leaders were like, what language is this? And I'm like, listen to me. The business needs to take a degree of risk in order to thrive, survive, navigate whatever was going to there, macro and micro economic turmoil, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And they were like, but we don't get it. I'm like, how much are you willing to swallow down
Yeah.
before you like spew your guts up, and it's like a scene
Yeah.
from The Exorcist, So yeah, talk me through like if there's any advice or tips that you would give to people to help with that cultural element of adoption.
Oh yeah. I mean, so I think there's two problems of adoption. There's the one you just said, which is the business understanding of the language and what it means to them. And then there's I suppose the individual thing. I think I can't tell which one is the bigger problem, but one of the problems definitely, the individual one is the easier one to understand, which is that businesses need to change to a culture of accountability, individual accountability, ownership. I am a manager, I am a product owner, I am whatever. I am then therefore accountable to the stuff that happens within my remit, and therefore any risks that are there, I'm accountable to those things. It's been strange to see that in almost every business that I work in, the disconnect between somebody maybe owning a risk and having agency to fix that is really high, because the complexity of businesses, like you have a product owner who doesn't actually do development, and the developers don't actually support the infrastructure. Again, these are in maybe bigger size businesses, but you end up having this like chain. But it's like, okay, yeah, but at some point you're selling the product, or at some point you own the features in the product. You gotta, somebody has to be responsible. And that's one of those things. Every business is slightly different. I've worked with some businesses where that was really good. I've worked with some businesses that it's just like literally a risk goes around the world where somebody's like, oh yeah, I guess I could fix that. So that's one thing, like kind of bringing back that owner. It's like people want to be accountable and owner when things are really cool, but they don't want to own problems. It's like, yeah, you got to own the problems too.
Yeah, and people forget they could use this when it comes to end of year performance. I had an engineer who smashed out tens of thousands of vulnerabilities, and I was like, this is incredible. You've managed to fix this huge risk to the organization. But the wider context, everybody was like, who cares? I'm like, oh my God, he's doing like 3 engineers worth of workload. He's helping all these different departments.
Yeah.
It's like, this is very, very important. But they were like, but yeah, I mean, I'm the risk owner, but he's fixing it. So again, that accountability, you're right. People like it when it's cool, but when it's not so cool, again, I always say, take a positive spin on it. You take accountability, then you're showing everyone your leadership qualities, you're showing responsibility, and you're showing maturity to say, you're right, it does land on my lap. Let me lead it forward. Let me get some people to work on it, or I'll single-handedly manage this end to end. That's where an organization needs to be more willing to become more mature.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to take a couple of minutes and talk about today's sponsor, which is Vanta. Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Through my experiences of using Vanta, Vanta automates compliance. It covers everything from SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and many more, saving you time and money, while helping you build customer trust. I love all the insights that it gives me, covering everything from asset management, my control failures, audit status, even vulnerabilities from other connecting systems which have been integrated into the platform. Having a centralized place for something like an ISO program has been a godsend for me. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Why Vanta? With over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Flow Health, and Quora, they all use Vanta to manage risk and provide security in real time. So, my listeners can claim a special offer of $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/decloaked. That's vanta.com/decloaked. Thanks.
It's less about security, to be honest. That for me is just organizational maturity. Like, hire people and curate the people, or I forget what the other word for it is, but try to work on those people that have that sense of responsibility, that are equally like, this isn't right, let me fix it. You want to have those people in your business. You want to have those people as the ones that are leading, right? Who want to take change, who don't accept real problems. I'm not saying pragmatic issues. I'm not saying, there's a minor vulnerability, but people who will be like, okay, I see that this can be a problem and I'm not going to let that sleep. I'm going to try to solve it. You want those.
Nice. And then your other topic, security as a USP, was that?
Yeah. But the other thing about the security, about the risk culture, which I think is also an important piece, is what is, as you said, is with senior leadership and just trying to imbue that thing. I've heard about this appetite thing as well. Like, I remember at InfoSec, somebody's giving a talk and they're like, risk appetite is dead, don't use it. I'm like, no, this is a fundamentally useful concept. So instead of trying to say the businesses don't understand things like risk appetite, get them to understand. Say, look, you're willing to do XYZ thing. Are you willing to lose 50,000 a month on something in order to gain something else? Yes, depending on the size of your business. But they have to make that decision. And at the same time, they should understand that there are some things that you just simply won't do. You're not going to bet $50 million, are you? Right? As most businesses. It's like, no. Okay, well then that's what it is. Teach businesses this kind of thinking. And again, this is not a security thing. It really it's helpful for security, but this is a business thing. This is just like understanding a little bit of methodology, a little bit of rigor around how do we make good business decisions.
I think people forget that risk appetite and stuff it's a gamble. Everyone should be familiar with gambling or hedging your bets on certain things in order to maybe, I don't know, get a return. It's the exact same thing. And risk appetite should be at a business level above all of us, where they understand the mechanics of running the organization, the threats to the organization, and the ability to grow. That's, to me, is risk appetite. But you're right. When someone says, hey, we need to get rid of risk appetite, that ends up descending into chaos, or like a WeWork scenario where it's just like, just keep doing it until the money runs out. And then
and I think it's that everything, you hire an employee, you might think, oh, we have this amount of, people resources, we can get this amount of stuff done. It's like, no, man, that's always a risk, right? That amount of people resources, hopefully will get that amount of stuff done. If they're, they have the time, if they don't have problems at home, if XYZ. So yeah, it's absolutely that.
Yeah.
I think the quickest way to get businesses, though, to kind of understand that is, either you listen to this podcast and kind of like explain that, or, like I'm going to strike out on my own for a little bit and do a little side consulting. So you could always just ask me to come and talk to your businesses or help you solve that problem.
Yeah.
Create a model that works for you and do a risk appetite workshop with your strategic leaders. That is super key. That is the most important, actually.
So yes, back to risk appetite. As I was saying, Troy is available if anyone wants to reach out to him. Troy's someone that I look up to in the industry, and they're really good when it comes to things like engineering, even translating the most complex subject matter into, let's just say, common language, and also anything relating to stuff that we've just spoken about, like risk management and compliance. So there you go, Troy. Shameless plug now that you're a free agent. And then your secondary topic. Yeah, do you want to run through your other topic you think needs clarity and relevance in the industry?
Yeah, security assurance. I mean, we're talking about two things that are like my bread and butter, and I feel like is corporate. So when I talk about like the way I think about security, I think at the heart, I'm very much a security architect. It's like that kind of technical engineering sense, and I'm definitely by far not the most technical person, not the best engineer, but I get how these things work in principle. And one of the things I've discovered through doing a lot of consultancy, internal consultancy or external or security assurance, is how difficult it is to always assess a thing. Like it's a lot of labor, it's a lot of work, but also how often one-dimensionally we kind of do it. So, we're all familiar with SSDLC, SAST, DAST, all that kind of stuff. Oddly enough, a lot of businesses kind of end there, or maybe they don't even get that far. They're like, oh, let me pen test this application. Then I'll know if it's secure. It's like, that is just scratching the surface,
Yeah.
And then they go to SAST and they're like, okay, well, then I'll know it's secure. It's like, okay, once again, you're like, yeah, you're going deeper, and that is really good. But it's like, what is your application meant to be doing? Like these things can't really scan all of that. You can't scan intent. I mean, I suppose unless you're using large language models, which are apparently really good at intent modeling, but that's a digression.
Yeah.
But you can't really scan your way out of that. And what I ended up doing years ago is kind of starting a model that's like, okay, cool. One, how do I assess applications all the same way in a kind of standardized way, but also understand what they're for, and therefore start taking away that standardized part. Like you can't asking a firewall question about like a SaaS app is kind of stupid. Yeah. Or like to some degree, like an antivirus. Like, is your application protected by an antivirus? Like, most people don't know the answer to that question. Only the SaaS vendor knows that, and sometimes they don't. It's like, but there is relevant questions about it. Like how is it authenticated? That's always a relevant question. So I also believe this is an area where you kind of need not a paradigm shift, but we need to grow into a kind of a different maturity model. One that is like, we have this application, this system, we intend to do this with it. This is how much money it's going to make us. This is whatever. And then let's go through each one of those systematically, but also like keep good records of it. I think that's one of those things that I've been, I suppose, pioneering. And thankfully and weirdly, I think a lot of businesses that I've worked with as partners, they're like, oh, this is genius. Why isn't anybody else doing this? I'm like, what do you mean nobody else is doing this? Why isn't anybody else doing this? I have the same question for them,
Yeah.
It's definitely an area that we need to change, because pen testing is good, but it only makes sense in context. And I think, again, this is where security as the insurance policy, we're just always forgetting the context. I don't know why that keeps happening.
I think maybe it's like having a bunch of people in a group and no one really talks to each other. You know, they kind of say, oh, there's David, or there's Suzanne, and it's like, right, they're responsible for this, but they don't really understand that whole chain of events and that whole life cycle between, you know, like you mentioned an app being built. What's the purpose of the app? What's the strategic value to the business? Oh,
Yeah.
so it's an app for a dating company. It's going to generate 10 million in revenue. Okay. So what about things like credential stuffing? You know, what their kind of general threat modeling, you know, I know of a person, their company released an app, substantial app, and they didn't even have rate limits. And it's like, you know, why is the app not working? You know, it's under just constant duress, or there's just stability issues. Then you start to plug other services at the back end, and it's like these things can't cope. And I think you're right, people don't understand the different layers. So obviously you mentioned pen test, and then you've got SAST and DAST. But then what about back-end services that talk to the app?
Yeah.
You know, what about the maintenance of that? What about
What DR?
Yeah.
Like one of the questions I have often when I set up like a systematic approach in the business is like, okay, what's your DR thing? And you realize how many, you know, places haven't really thought about it. Like, oh, it's single. Like, what's your RTO? What's your RPO? I understand that not everybody knows what those things mean, but as you say, okay, how long will it take you to get back? And how much data are you going to lose when you do that restore? How long? And it's those kind of questions. And then, again, people start to, oh, you asked me a hard question, but I also realize that maybe I should know the answer to that question, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's down to us to really help and guide people to kind of, so that repetition cycle is built in, and then they can take it forward rather than just being like, oh, the security guy or the architect's asking me this question, or, you know, moan, Gen Z this, Gen Z that. It's just like, right, I get it, but it's like, come on, you know, these things need to be in sync. But
I think I think you said something interesting. You said, you know, often organizations, they just, you know, one person doesn't really know what the other thing is happening, or what the other person is doing, or how it all kind of fits together. And I think one of the trends I have noticed is that when a business has kind of an enterprise architecture function, or has a head architect who's really manipulating, trying to design for like, how do we want our business to function, like our offerings. I'm talking mostly in tech because I've worked in almost exclusively tech businesses, high tech, whatever. It tends to work better because then you have people who are, whether they're super professional architects like Prince 2 and all that kind of thing, or whether there are people like me who are just like, I just get how systems work. That kind of holistic approach in a business usually leads you to make a lot better kind of decisions, a lot better threat modeling, a lot better, okay, cool, we understand how this should be and shouldn't be. A lot of businesses also lack that. In the same way businesses lack technical writing, maybe.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, that old big problem space itself. But yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting thing. It kind of made me think, I'm like, oh yeah, they're always the same places. Oh, you don't have an architecture function? Okay. So
yeah, and it'll be some obscure engineer or some product individual that just knows all the mechanics and nothing written down. And again, this is for the rest of the world to try and solve. But I guess we move on to the last item of the podcast episode. Is the one thing in cyber you think is BS, and it needs clearing up in the industry. That's what always makes me laugh, because people either go absolute ham on it or they're just very moderate. So what's your one thing you think is BS? Yeah.
I struggle to come up with a good answer, but I think I'm gonna go with my gut instinct. I think DLP is bullshit.
Listen, it's not a game show here, Troy. You can throw anybody or anything under the bus.
But I think it's BS for a couple reasons.
DLP is a good shout. We haven't had it yet, so yes, please tell in. Yeah.
Unless you are a state agency where you really have a lot to lose, DLP can be like just really like, ugh, for the people working for you, you know, like not everybody signs up for a DLP kind of thing. Also, most of the time it's not that good. Like it's just
the amount of rule configuration, the amount of testing, the amount of blocking, the amount of noise that it creates. I get it, like in a really stringent financial services, right? If you have like customer data and stuff, right? Cool.
Yeah.
But you would just outsource to get that built, But like even things like companies that build apps, they're trying to deploy it, and it's like they've already, like, the Chinese have already replicated the app. It's free and it's on a marketplace. So
Yeah.
your intellectual property's already been taken. The source code is gone. Who cares if an Excel spreadsheet goes out the door relating to P&L or something?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah.
It's one of those, I find it's tricky. Like I had one business that I was, again, because I had like I did a strategic risk appetite exercise with the exec. I figured out really quickly, I'm like, you guys don't want to put this in. None of the people appreciating this, working here will appreciate this, and you don't have enough appreciation. So let's not go down that route.
Yeah.
And yeah, because sometimes it just doesn't bring that much value. Also, it kind of forgets that, again, unless we're talking about some really specific precious intellectual property, which is always easier. If you have a specific thing, it's easy to protect that one thing. It's not easy to protect everything as a general concept. But unless you're in that position, I mean, yeah, like people produce, the classic thing. It's like, oh, you leave a business. I remember I left one business and I was like, oh, can I take some of this? Because these are just my configs. I happen to do them here. It would be easier if I didn't have to rewrite all of that because it took a while. And they were like, yeah, no. I'm like, you don't, this might be in a sense your intellectual property, but also this isn't valuable to you. It's only valuable. It's valuable in a sense to as a thought process. But all you're just saying is like, yes, we prefer that you would take more time to recreate the same thing that's already in your mind. So there's also this kind of disconnect between what is valuable intellectual property.
Yeah.
When it comes to like DLP as well, it's like,
I think you have the other aspect of it where you have employees who think their company laptop machine is theirs.
And then, which is insane, right? That's
like they leave the business and they reach out and say, "Hey, can I access this drive because that's where all my like personal files are?" And then you look at the drive. I mean, some of the stuff I've seen in drives, you're like, "This is just bizarre." Like, I had someone. Sorry.
That the occasional thing happens, like you download something and it's on your work laptop for a bit before you transfer it over to somewhere else. If you can, again, because a lot of DLP services, if you use that, they'll be like, you can't do this. I'm like, well, shit, I need this bank statement. Okay, man. I'm like, I got to send it out to my personal email. But other than these things, it's like, yeah, storing any mass amounts of personal information, your stuff on your work PC.
It's crazy. I've saw everything from mortgage statements to passport information. Some of it is just crazy. I've even seen someone keep encryption keys for their own services that we're running, and I'm like, whoa, this is.
You mean like SSH keys or like full on like
full on encryption keys for full private keys? And I'm like, sorry. So then that raises the wider issue of, again, what exactly what are people doing? It's mad. But again, obviously no companies have been disclosed during this episode, so we're all good.
Yeah, of course. How do you feel? I almost want to ask you, sorry, if I'm pushing our time, you let me know. But
I'm good.
How do you feel about BYOD? I'm sometimes I feel so divided about it.
I think if you have now the actual term, you're going to laugh at this, the actual term of how to navigate this has completely, right, here we go. I'm composing myself, right? You've caught me off guard because I'm not used to someone asking me on this podcast a question. So bring your own device, or as I used to call it, bring your own donkey. I was trending at one point on LinkedIn like 7 years ago for calling a guy out on this. Bring your own donkey, lols. But yeah, so I think within reason, right? So people obviously going to use their phone to access things like Slack, Teams, some email. There's nothing really there that I mean, the level that an attacker would need to go to compromise that person's device is insane. Like you need to be like something out of like Inception movie.
Yeah.
3 levels deep in a dream, you know, with Leonardo DiCaprio running about in your head trying to figure out how to get into your machine, you know, or your phone. So I think, you know, within reason, you know, people bringing, if someone just rocks up and says, hey, I'm bringing a Windows machine to do work today, well, is it updated? Is it configured? Does it have an AV? There's these things. I mean, I've seen before, you know, maybe we'll work with like an external contractor and their machine has been absolutely loaded with stuff. And it's like, wow, you know, and then you ask them, it's like, oh, just download anything. And it's like,
I
wow.
kind of get to the same place. I kind of think actually it's about posture assessment. I think about it the same way I used to think about encryption. You know, years ago, it'd be like everything needs to be VPN. I'm like, no. The need is end-to-end encryption. I don't care if you use HTTPS. I don't care if you use SSH. I care that it's encrypted. The method, most of the time, unless you use a crap method, doesn't really change the result. So the same thing I kind of think with BYOD is like, actually, what I want as the result is that it's updated and that there's AV protection. So it's protected. And depending on the business, that I can nullify stuff on your system, right? So not quite DLP, but basically, as long as you kind of fit this like thing, then I can trust your device. The whole zero trust posture, authentication, system posture, device posture. I kind of lean on that. Always, it's kind of hard to do sometimes, but yeah, that's my kind of thing. It's like, and then of course, if you're an employee and you're like, okay, I can see to that, I'll have the corporate asset management thing installed. Great, it's still your device. Whenever you leave the company, I'll take my software off of it, kind of thing. That.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
while you're working for us, I need to make sure that your stuff's protected, kind of thing.
Yeah, we've all, like I've seen many cases where people had to tell employees, like, listen, if you're using these for personal use, the minute you leave, it's getting wiped.
Yeah.
So, you know, consider that, you know, and I think sometimes it's just laziness. You know, people just, rather than having 2 machines running side by side, or just people get a bit, you know, just complacent, and it's always going to be here. You know, even things like zero trust, you know, is a huge thing. Well, if you don't get it done right, you alienate your entire employee base.
Yeah,
And then even things that
tough.
like web filtering, so many companies haven't even considered that yet. And then you'll find a situation, and then you're like, oh my God, people have been watching porn or they've been doing stuff or whatever it may be. And it's like, these are still happening. Even in like, I've heard stories in like financial services, family-run businesses are supposed to be some of the worst, you know, and even like small startups, you know, they're like people doing whatever they want on their machine, and then it's like, oh, I've just bricked a 3K MacBook, and it's like, oh man, not another one, David. It's twice in a month you've done it, you know, or whatever. I'm obviously making this up for examples, but yeah. So, any other thoughts before we conclude, then, Troy?
No, man, that's all good. I mean, I could talk about all of this for literally days.
I mean, listen, we'll have a follow up. You know, again, depending on where things lay, because obviously you're branching out as an independent consultant or getting back into that again, should I say? You know, you are available. You're a gun for hire. So if anyone, again, I think this is like the 5th time or something I'm plugging Troy, but please, like, I get no. For me, it's important because you want to work with really good people. People get your culture, and people that don't have a stick up the backside when it comes to security. And you know, we need more and more people like yourself, Troy, that are very open to collaboration, because that's pretty key when it comes to implementing security programs. So yeah, if there's no other items, then Troy, again, thank you so much for your time. I absolutely love catching up with you. We didn't even once speak about music, which is insane. Well, we did mention we have a shared playlist. I know. I was going to say, you know, give me some bands you've been listening to recently, but well, we can obviously talk about that offline. But again, everyone, please like, share, subscribe, add some comments, show Troy some love on the socials. And yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks.